Welcome to Neuro Revolution. The world was not designed for us, so we are creating a new one. Hear the stories of neurodivergent entrepreneurs, creatives, and changemakers. The rebel minds changing the world. Hello there, and welcome to Neuro Revolution's first episode. This is a podcast where I will be interviewing neurodivergent entrepreneurs, creatives, and changemakers. I'm also calling it the Neuro Revolution because I really feel that it's time for a neuroaffirming revolution in all of these aspects of life, especially for entrepreneurs, creatives, and changemakers, and that we'll be leading the way to this neuroaffirming revolution. So my name is Jennilee Porch, and I am a neurodivergent person, and all of those things that I just mentioned, which is why I am here to create this podcast and host these conversations. I'm very excited. There's going to be so many different folks on the podcast talking about their projects, what is helping them as they move through being an entrepreneur, creative, or changemaker as a neurodivergent person, how they're making it work for them in a neuroaffirming way. And maybe to tell you just a little bit about me and like who this person is that's hosting this podcast. I am definitely a late discovered neurodivergent person. In a way, it wasn't super late discovery for me personally, because I have thought this about myself for a long, long time. Actually, even since I was in high school, I had the sense I was different in some ways, or in some way. And I was trying to figure out what that was. And I could tell that with the social interactions. I could tell that with the way I was engaging with the work involved with school. I always actually did really well academically, or at least decently well. But I could tell that there was something in between me and like my greatest potential. And finding that connection and figuring out what's happening took me many decades. Not for lack of trying, and not for truly having known about myself what was way before I was able to get someone to agree with me. And I know for myself, I went and did a ADHD assessment when I was in high school because I had told my mom, I really think maybe I have hypersensitivity disorder or something like. There are so many reasons for that. I didn't actually even think of like the autism part until a lot later. I probably had a lot of stereotypical understandings of what that was, and definitely nothing that really related to my own personal experience. So it was a long journey, right? Like it wasn't discovered then by a professional, even though I was already questioning that myself. And so there were multiple times in my life where I just sort of dropped it. Like I would get really convinced. I'm like, no, this makes sense. Like I found these resources. I've done all this research. This makes sense. And I would bring it to somebody and then just get shut down. I'd be like, well, I suppose they know more than me about this, even though many times I probably was actually much more well-versed in the research than the person I was talking to at the time. And so, yeah, it was a long, long journey of being misdiagnosed in some ways with like social anxiety disorder. I certainly had a lot of anxiety for a long time, but it wasn't really identified as like what the actual source was. And I had always wondered that in my mind logically. I was like, well, but why? Why is there all this fear? It can't just come out of nothing. I just had the sense for myself, at least. I think for some folks it can. But for me, I had the sense that like this doesn't really answer this question. This doesn't really describe everything that's happening. And so I kind of went back later on. I tried to get another assessment through the undergraduate school when I was in graduate school because I had been hitting burnout multiple times. I hit burnout in undergraduate. I had burnout again when I was in graduate school. I almost didn't finish. But I was also having a big deconstruction of my own worldview. So that was a whole thing. Whole other story. But actually, no, I hit burnout at least 3 times by that point. like really intense burnout. When we talk about neurodivergent burnout, this is a whole other level of burnout that is not properly described when someone's talking about burnout from a neurotypical lens. So do understand that. And also, if you've experienced it, be validated. This is, it's a whole other thing. Right. So like kind of again, and they're like, well, we can't really tell conclusively, right? So like again, and that pushed me out another decade before I really got someone to be like, no, yeah, you've been right this whole time. Like, I know. But, and I mean, just to sort of wrap up this particular story around like officially being recognized as neurodivergent, I had actually came to a point when I just decided that, self-identifying was just going to be what happened because I didn't have the money to go get an assessment again. But I just knew, I had done my own research. I knew that this was me. And so I just was going to do that. And I remember I was sitting in my naturopathic doctor's office, and I just sort of mentioned, like, well, I have all these digestive things, but that's common for neurodivergent people. I just sort of like said it offhand. And then I said something about like, well, I don't really have official anything, but like, I'm pretty sure this is like who I am. And she had said, well, I actually know somebody who can assess for adults and takes your insurance. And I remember sitting in that room almost crying because somebody had taken me seriously. They weren't just dismissing what I was saying, like I didn't look it up and wasn't really well versed in what I was talking about. And also was connecting me to resources I didn't think were possible. So I really, really, really appreciate that person. Truly grateful for them and how that has helped me even more come to a place of self-understanding, self-acceptance, and a shifting of how I approach work. And I also hope that this podcast is a place where we can talk about that. Like we may have come to this understanding of ourselves after many decades or not. Hopefully for a lot of younger people that's not the case and you don't have to wait that long. And go through lots of different types of suffering to get to an understanding that they probably will be suffering anyways because of the way that the world is designed. But that we can be talking about like how, from this understanding about yourself, how do you create a life, a way of being, and then work in the world that is aligned with your strengths and who you really are and your needs, because they're going to be different and they're not going to be necessarily supported in the world. So yeah, so what does that look like? How do we do that? What are some tips from people who are doing it right now? And then maybe also this can be a space where inspiration can be sparked, that if these are things that you're not necessarily working on now, but you would like to, that you would hear from people who are doing it, who can talk about what it's like being in the trenches of these projects, of these businesses, and what's been working for them, that maybe, even if it's not going to directly relate to how you would do it, that you would at least be inspired to a greater understanding of how you could. And even knowing that you could, because you can. And the world needs your beautiful, unique, amazing brain and nervous system and self to create what it is you're here to create. And that's really important to me. And that's one of the reasons why I'm making this podcast. Because I know personally that I think another part of that story, along with many burnouts and the struggle with getting properly identified, was that I also was struggling myself with employment and creating a career and creating something in the world that would actually sustain me and allow me to thrive. And so I have a big heart for our community and providing information and resources on how to do that, especially when you need to do it in an alternative fashion, because the regular forms of work maybe just aren't working for you. I know that at least with the autistic community, that the statistics on underemployment and unemployment are really, really high. And that means that we're not surviving properly. That's not okay with me. So, at least for me, I've always felt this draw towards entrepreneurship. And now, of course, it has its own challenges because there's all sorts of other things that then you have to do, and you have to do it by yourself, usually, at least initially. And so I would like to be a resource. I would like this to be a resource so that we can share amongst our community what's working, how to face these challenges, how to move forward, and in a way where we are deconstructing internalized ableism, where we are honoring our rhythms, honoring our needs, doing it in a way that's neuroaffirming, whatever that means to you. And it can take a practice of self-awareness as you begin to learn who you are. If this is new to you, if this understanding of yourself is new to you, sort of simultaneously learning who you are and deconstructing that shame, letting go of it, healing it, so that you can show up for yourself in a way that doesn't lead to that burnout, but actually allows you to thrive. So this is my vision for this podcast. And I'm excited for what we can create and share with each other as each of us individually, like as we do this in our own life, we are part of the revolution of the larger world catching on and making the spaces much more accessible and neuroaffirming. So, I know that with this podcast, it starts with each of these stories, but it also starts with whoever this inspires, you in your individual life, showing up in a way that's more empowered, with more agency, more authentically unmasked if you want to be, is part of this revolution, this work. So I'm excited for this. Thank you for joining me here. I hope that you connected with the people that are being interviewed and also my work. Know that I will be creating resources. I can maybe facilitating groups and other things so you can be a part of this community in lots of different ways over time as this is being created. And I'm also honoring my own self in this creation. It's not going to be linear, and that's okay. But this part is starting now, and these conversations are important to be having. And so I hope that you engage with this wherever you find this podcast, whether that's in video form or audio. Please be commenting, be following, engage with the people that have given their time and their expertise to share what they know. And yeah, let's do this. Let's change the world. One rebel mind at a time.